Alrighty, welcome to Bungalows for Bachelors number 10. Today we are going to be talking about land clearing. Conveniently, I've been doing some land clearing on my property, and let's just jump right in here from the beginning. All right, so we are now out of phase one, and we are not going to talk about planning and stuff like that anymore. Now we're in phase two, doing stuff, site development, land clearing. You got a property with a bunch of stuff on it. You're going to start doing stuff. You get to start moving forward. So for the most part, you got to ask yourself, what is being cleared off the land? And if you look at these three photos, you will probably see three things in common, and that is that they are covered in trees. Most of the time, when you are clearing raw land, if you need to, the thing you are clearing off the raw land is trees. Sometimes you want all of them gone, sometimes you want to keep some big ones. Occasionally there will be other features like boulders or like trash people left behind or junk, whatever it may be. But most of the time, we're talking about trees. So most of this discussion is going to be about trees. So how would one remove some trees? Well, there are three main sources of power you can use to move the trees or to knock them over and to remove them. The first one is going to be heavy equipment. This is going to be the most expensive by the time, but cheap by the job, more than likely, depending on how much time you have to spend. If you can rent some heavy equipment, you can work very quickly if you know how to operate it, and it's going to be very effective. The next thing is going to be small equipment, which is your chainsaws and any other smaller power tools that are going to cut things faster than just using an axe, but they're still very useful equipment. And of course, human power is the last thing that's going to help you clear a lot. If you need to pick up a log and move it, or pick up brush and move it, and you just have an axe and maybe some loppers and stuff, you can clear land. You don't have to have a huge budget to be able to do this, which is partially why I jumped right in and started doing this. I will be renting heavy equipment at the end of the process to pull all the stumps, but I think that's about it. So these are going to be the three main methods here. So talk a little bit about heavy equipment. The first thing that is kind of like just the big bad beast of land clearing is going to be a bulldozer. So this is going to be a very powerful, heavy tool that's going to be able to move pretty much anything and knock over pretty much any tree, unless you're dealing with huge trees. Um, so this is useful if you have a lot of land and you need to also do some grading with the land and move the dirt. Most of the time, this is going to be unnecessary, though. It is extremely expensive to operate equipment that is this intense. So most people aren't going to be doing it. The next thing that's going to be a little more convenient is an excavator. Now you can use kind of mid-range size excavators. You don't need huge ones, but you really aren't going to be able to do much with the mini excavators, the really tiny ones. They're just not going to have enough power to move the trees. So if you can get a medium-sized excavator in there, you can use it to basically, if you got a thumb on your bucket, you can grab trees, push them around, you can knock them over, leverage trees around. Their excavators are very maneuverable through property, way more so than a bulldozer would be. And these are going to be very good at picking things up and moving things. And if you got some stumps that are stuck in the ground, you can dig around the stump. You can rip that stump out of the ground with a good excavator. So that's going to be the next most likely thing you're going to want. And if you don't have an excavator, then you are likely going to want a skid steer after that, or maybe a smaller mini skid steer with some attachments on it. But the basic premise of these guys is these are very efficient at moving a lot of material. So you can get some attachments on the front that are basically just like big claws that open and close, and you can cut down a bunch of trees on your own without knocking them over with equipment, and then use the skid steer to run around, grab them all, pick them up, put them in piles, put them in a trailer, whatever you want to do. It's a very, very efficient way of moving the trees around once they're knocked over. An excavator can do the same thing, but they move much slower. So not as efficient. And of course, a stump grinder is on the smaller end of equipment, but they are very effective at making the exporting of the stumps not a problem. You're basically going to grind the stump into sawdust, and you're not going to have to deal with it. It's going to get mixed in with the dirt around you, and no big deal. No one's upset. The only thing that is sort of a drawback about this one is if you have a really, really big stump, you may end up with more tap roots and larger roots left in the soil. And if you're putting this close to a foundation or under a foundation or something like that, it wouldn't be very optimal because eventually that's going to decay and cause a problem. So not the best for that situation. So this is in case you're not familiar with what a bulldozer would look like. This is pretty much it. Just a big old heavy machine with tracks, and it can push a lot of stuff. This would be mid-sized excavators. You can see all these photos. The excavator has a thumb on the bucket, so you can grab trees and pick them up in piles and move them around very efficiently. You can, of course, use the teeth on the bucket to rip at roots and pull things up out of the ground. And these are some examples of skid steers. Some have tracks, some have wheels. The wheeled ones are faster, but they will get less grip in nasty conditions. So a little bit of a trade-off there. And then, of course, that forky thing in the front, that is an attachment for grappling onto piles of brush and things you want to move around. And this guy is some examples of stump grinders in different sizes. So as you can see, the basic premise here, there's a spinning disc on the front that's got some very sharp, very hard, and very big teeth. And it spins extremely quickly, and it just basically moves side to side, kind of like a mill, and it just grinds away at the stump and passes. And you do this, it slowly kind of goes deeper into the ground until you've ground away most of the stump. And as you can see, the problem here is that you can grind away most of the wood, but you're not going to ever be able to get those roots out of the ground with this tool, unless you're moving some other way. So again, here, small equipment is pretty much chainsaws. I mean, you can get other yard equipment and stuff like that that's got engines on it, and it'll do the same kind of thing. But most of the land clearing work is going to be chainsaws. And if you want to dull your chain very quickly, then you can stick it into the ground and cut some roots like in the photo on the right. And of course, if you got nothing else but an axe and big muscles, you can clear your land with your power as a man. Use your big, strong muscles, cut things down, and move them like we did in the good old days. That's pretty straightforward. Which is kind of what makes land clearing so cool. It's such a wide variety of stuff. If you don't have a huge budget, you can still start doing something, and it's very good. So, what do we do with all the stuff that we're cutting down? All these trees, all these logs. What are some of our options here? Well, sort of the first option is if you have a lot of open area and you have sort of a wetter environment or not a dry spell or something, then you can put a burn pile together. This is frequent on bigger lots that have acreage to make a huge mound of wood in the middle of nothing but grass maybe and light it on fire. They burn very hot and they burn for a very long time. So you have to be careful that you don't start fires. But that's one way to do it. And that's pretty cheap because all you got to do is get the fire started and all your material will be consumed on the spot. And it'll just eventually, rain and be absorbed into the soil and no big deal. You didn't have to pay for any exporting or anything like that. Another option is just to haul it off, like in the middle bottom photo, you just throw it all in a trailer and you haul it off to a dump and dump the brush in the dump. If you have a small lot, like in a city, that's most likely what you're going to end up doing because you're probably not going to have huge trees and you're not going to have a lot of huge trees. So lumber is not really going to be an option. Maybe you can cut it up into firewood if you want, but a lot of it's just going to be hauled off. Of course, if you have a lot of really good timber, then you can potentially get a lumber yard or somebody who will pay for good sized trees that are clean and straight and everything to come get them. That is a possibility. And if you don't want to do that, then you can try to basically do a combination, which is essentially throw the brush in a pile or throw the brush away, the small pieces, and then cut up the big pieces into some firewood, stack it up and let it dry for a year or two, and you've got a great stack of firewood. So those are pretty much the things you can do with it. On the property that I'm working with, I am going to apply the strategy of making a small pile of the brushy stuff and then cutting up the firewood from the other stuff because I do like fires. And you can have a campfire outside maybe 4 times a year in Texas when it gets cold and feels nice outside. Otherwise, it's still a bit too warm. So, tree permits. If you are going to be cutting down trees, believe it or not, there are people in the world that don't like that. They do have a name. I forget what the name is, but it has something to do with affection and trees. And they have things to say about things that are growing out of the ground and their life and things like that. And because of that, there are certain rules that need to be followed if you are building in an area that is going to be subject to those rules. San Antonio, for example, is extremely, extremely like tight on tree cutting and tree permits. If you have a little lot and you're going to build one house on it, you can pretty much not have to worry a ton and not have to pay a big deal. You're going to have to pay a good amount for a tree permit in the first place because, got to pay the government. But also, they have some interesting tree coverage rules that make you plant trees if you're not going to have enough shade value or whatever it is they call it. So they're very particular about that. And if you're a developer, God forbid you have to cut down some big trees, and a lot of them, you're going to pay a lot of money. There was one project I worked with where they were developing maybe a 2-acre lot into a whole bunch of really tight townhomes in one street. And they had to remove pretty much all the trees because they're just clear cutting the thing because they want to make money. The more stuff they cram on there, the more money they make. That's how developers work. And there was a few very, very large trees on that property that were big old oak trees. And San Antonio loves its big old oak trees. And there was what they ended up having to do was they had to pay about $200,000, not just in the tree permit. They had to pay for the tree permit, and then they had to pay $200,000 to be allowed to remove all those other trees because there were some big ones. And there was one really big tree, it was like a 3-foot diameter oak tree that they got really close to, and they're going to try to keep it. But basically what they do is they have to pay, and you pay for insurance on the tree, basically. So if the tree dies, they end up paying more just in case. So it's like, it can be crazy. So check with your county. Most likely the county is not going to have rules on tree permits. That's just too broad. And cities might if they are particularly large and have a lot of people who like trees in it. And trees do provide lots of wonderful things. Natural shade, it's good for keeping a house environment cool in the summer and things like that. So trees are very valuable. We do like them. But be aware that there are rules. You may not be able to just walk onto your property and start cutting down trees. So that is something to be aware of. If you want to learn more about the subject and clearing your property of its trees in general, then you can watch YouTube video World's Best Tree Felling Tutorial by channel Guilty of Treason at Eastside Tree Works and other channel content. This guy is an arborist in the Northwest United States. He does a very, very good job of creating very good content. He works on a crew of people who cut down one tree at a time, basically, but the tree is in situations where it's this like 150-foot tall fir tree in the middle of somebody's backyard in a really expensive neighborhood. So it's really cool to watch them, work with trees in tight situations like that. So good for rigging, good for tree felling, all that stuff. You should watch YouTube video Clearing 1 Acre of Trees and Underbrush by channel Upstate Brush Control and other channel content. You ought to watch video Clearing Land for a New Home in Florida. It's not as difficult as you think. Forestry Mulching by channel The Tree Shop and other content. This guy does a good job showing a very different kind of clearing. His basic premise is that he's got this skid steer, and the attachment on the front is like a big old grinder. So it's like a bunch of stump grinders all together in a big old box blade kind of thing. And he basically just runs over anything with it in the front and it just shreds it all to pieces. And the type of trees that exists in Florida is conducive for taking that down. So you wouldn't use something like that on my property where I've got a whole bunch of 30+ foot tall trees that are skinny. That just wouldn't work. It would not be safe to knock something over like that. And then of course you can watch YouTube video, how much land can you clear in 1 hour on a dozer by channel Hamiltonville Farm and other content. So this guy basically gives you that extreme situation where it's like, okay, we're going to use the big old heavy machine. How fast can I do this? Because I have this crazy powerful machine. So that said, those are great places to learn more information about the topic. And that ends the Bungalows for Bachelors number 10 about land clearing.